man holds a golden crown in his hands, staring at his reflection in its polished surface. But the crown has no weight. It passes through his fingers like water. Why do we chase what we cannot hold? Marcus had always believed that love was something you earned through sacrifice. Every morning, he would check his phone 17 times before getting out of bed, counting likes, measuring responses, calculating the precise temperature of affection from others. He had built his entire sense of worth on this delicate arithmetic of approval. One night, he found himself in a vast auction house that stretched beyond the horizon. The walls were lined with glass cases, each containing a different version of himself. Marcus the successful, Marcus the beloved, Marcus the desired. The auctioneer, a figure whose face shifted like smoke, called out bids for each identity. Who will pay for the man who never asks for anything? The bidding was fierce. Who will take the one who begs prettily? Silence. Marcus watched in horror as his pleading self, the version that texted twice when once went unanswered, that explained his feelings in paragraphs, that apologized for existing, sat unsold, gathering dust. Meanwhile, a figure in the back corner, shrouded and mysterious, purchased every indifferent version without even looking up from his book. The mysterious buyer's face remained hidden, but Marcus recognized the posture. It was himself, but a version that had forgotten how to beg. As Schopenhauer observed, the will to live drives us to seek validation. Yet, this very seeking ensures our suffering. The more desperately we chase acknowledgement, the more it recedes, like trying to catch our own shadow. The auction house dissolved. Marcus stood alone, holding nothing but the memory of who he might have been if he had never learned to plead for scraps of affection. The psychological concept revealed here is reactance theory, coined by Jack Brem in 1966. This principle explains why the more we chase something, the more it retreats. In modern dating culture, we see this in the paradox of thirst, desperate pursuit that repels the very thing it seeks. On social media, it manifests as the inverse relationship between neediness and engagement. In professional settings, it appears as the promotion that goes to those who seem least desperate for it. Through Schopenhauer's lens, this is the will's cruelest joke. It convinces us that we need external validation to survive, yet the very act of seeking it guarantees our disappointment. The will feeds on our desperation, keeping us trapped in cycles of pursuit and rejection. In the auction house of desire, desperation is the currency that buys nothing. What if the love you're chasing is already fleeing from your pursuit? What version of yourself are you auctioning away each time you explain why you deserve affection? The crown that weighs nothing cannot be grasped. It can only be worn by those who've forgotten they need it. What if the love you chase flees the very moment you reach for it? She stares into her bedroom mirror each morning, but instead of her own face, she sees everyone else's expectations staring back. The glass has become a window into 1,000 judging eyes. When did your reflection become their opinion? Sarah lived her life as a collection of performances, each one carefully calibrated to earn approval from a different audience. She was the daughter who never disappointed, the girlfriend who never demanded too much, the friend who always said yes. She had become so skilled at reading others that she had forgotten how to read herself. In her dreams, she wandered through a labyrinthine library where every book was a mirror. Each reflection showed her playing a different role: the apologetic lover, the grateful recipient of breadcrumbs, the woman who made herself smaller so others could feel larger. The mirrors stretched infinitely in both directions, creating a hall of fractured selves, each one desperate to please a different ghost of expectation. At the center of the labyrinth sat a single, ordinary mirror on a simple wooden stand. But when Sarah approached it, she saw nothing. The glass was completely empty. She pressed her face against the cold surface, searching for any trace of herself, but found only void. Then she heard whispers from the other mirrors. "She's nothing without us watching. She's nothing without our approval." But in that emptiness, something shifted. The absence of reflection was not a void. It was a canvas. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing for invisible eyes. The empty mirror held an infinite possibility, while the reflecting ones held only prison cells of expectation. Schopenhauer understood that we construct elaborate personas to navigate social reality, yet these masks become cages. The more we define ourselves through others' eyes, the further we drift from any authentic center. Sarah touched the empty mirror one last time. It remained blank, but somehow this felt like the truest reflection she had ever seen. This reveals the psychological concept of looking-glass self, developed by Charles Horton Cooley in 1902. It describes how we develop our sense of self based on how we think others perceive us. In contemporary life, this manifests in the curated perfection of social media personas, where authentic self-expression is sacrificed for algorithmic approval. In relationships, it appears as people-pleasing behavior that slowly erodes personal boundaries. In professional contexts, it shows up as imposter syndrome and the constant performance of worthiness. Schopenhauer would identify this as the will's manipulation of our social instincts. By making us dependent on external validation, the will ensures we remain trapped in suffering, forever chasing the approval of others while losing ourselves in the process. The mirror of social expectations becomes a prison where we mistake reflection for reality. The mirror that shows only others has stolen your face, but perhaps that theft is the first step toward finding who you really are. What would you see if every judging eye suddenly went blind? When you perform the role of the grateful lover, the accommodating friend, the apologetic dreamer, who is the audience you're really trying to please? In the empty mirror lies either your greatest fear or your only salvation. When your reflection becomes their opinion, who is left in the glass? He tends a garden where nothing grows naturally, every flower forced to bloom through artificial light. The plants reach desperately toward fake suns, growing tall but hollow. What happens when you nurture love that isn't real? David believed that if he just tried harder, loved more intensely, gave more completely, he could make anyone fall in love with him. He collected relationship advice like sacred text, memorizing the precise timing of texts, the exact ratio of interest to indifference, the calculated vulnerability that might unlock someone's heart. He found himself in an endless greenhouse filled with mechanical suns, bulbs that burned with cold, artificial light. Every plant in this garden grew according to his manipulation, flowers that bloomed because he adjusted their temperature, vines that reached toward him because he positioned their light sources, trees that bore fruit only when he administered the correct chemical cocktails. The garden was magnificent and entirely false. Each flower was beautiful but had no fragrance. Each fruit was perfect but tasteless. The plants grew tall and impressive, but when he touched them, they crumbled like paper. He had created a paradise of hollow beauty, where nothing lived except by his constant intervention. At the center of the garden stood a single wild rose, small and imperfect, growing in a patch of natural sunlight that had somehow broken through the artificial ceiling. It was thorny, asymmetrical, sometimes wilted, but it smelled like heaven and grew without his help. David reached for it, then stopped. His hands, stained with the chemicals of manipulation, might poison the only real thing in his world. As Schopenhauer noted, the will creates elaborate illusions to mask the emptiness of our striving. When we try to manufacture authentic connection, we create only more sophisticated forms of alienation. David stood paralyzed between his artificial garden and the wild rose, understanding finally that his greatest fear wasn't rejection, it was discovering that love couldn't be earned, manipulated, or controlled. This illustrates intermittent reinforcement, identified by B.F. Skinner as the most powerful form of behavioral conditioning. In modern dating, this appears as the addictive cycle of mixed signals, the occasional text, the sporadic attention, the unpredictable affection that keeps people hooked far longer than consistent rejection would. In social media, it manifests as the variable reward schedule of likes and comments. In relationships, it shows up as breadcrumbing and the toxic dance of hot and cold behavior. Schopenhauer would see this as the will's most sophisticated trap. It teaches us to become addicted to scraps of affection, making us work harder for less, while genuine love, freely given and received, appears almost threatening because it requires no manipulation. The artificial suns of forced attraction create only plastic flowers, while real love grows wild and untamed. The garden of artificial suns produces only beautiful corpses, flowers that look perfect but smell of nothing. What chemical cocktails are you mixing to make someone stay? When you adjust the light, control the temperature, and measure out precise doses of attention, are you growing love or manufacturing an addiction? The wild rose at the center of your artificial garden is either your salvation or your accusation. Do you nurture love or only engineer addiction? A king sits on a throne constructed entirely from his own apologies, each sorry stacked like a brick. The throne grows taller with every regret, lifting him further from the ground, further from power, further from respect. How high can you build a crown from self-diminishment? James apologized for taking up space, for having opinions, for feeling things too deeply. His apologies had become a second language, fluently spoken to lovers who grew tired of his contrition, friends who learned to exploit his guilt, family members who weaponized his sensitivity against him. He said, "Sorry for being sorry," and then apologized for the apology about apologizing. In the realm of his unconscious, James discovered he had built an entire kingdom from his regrets. The castle walls were mortared with, "I'm sorry I'm not enough." The bridges were constructed from, "Sorry for bothering you." And the foundation itself was built upon the bedrock of, "Sorry for existing." Citizens of this kingdom walked on streets paved with his self-recrimination, and they had grown fat and lazy on his endless supply of diminishment. At the center of this apologetic empire sat his throne, towering, unstable, built from every sorry he had ever uttered. From this height he could see the entire landscape of his accommodation, but he was so far from the ground that no one could hear his voice anymore. His subjects had learned to ignore him, knowing that any demand would eventually dissolve into another apology. James tried to climb down from his throne, but each step required dismantling an apology, and he had forgotten how to exist without saying sorry. The throne swayed dangerously, built too high, too hastily, from materials that couldn't bear the weight of a man who had forgotten his own worth. Below him, he glimpsed another version of himself, one who made statements instead of apologies, who took up space without asking permission, who spoke his truth and let others adjust to its weight. Schopenhauer observed that the will often disguises strength as weakness, convincing us that surrender is noble while teaching others to expect our capitulation. James realized his throne of apologies wasn't a seat of power. It was a prison that lifted him beyond relevance, built from the very words that had made him invisible. This reveals learned helplessness, discovered by Martin Seligman in the 1960s through his experiments with dogs who stopped trying to escape even when escape became possible. In relationships, this manifests as people who apologize preemptively, who shrink themselves to avoid conflict, who have learned that their needs don't matter. In professional settings, it appears as chronic undervaluation and the inability to negotiate from strength. In social dynamics, it shows up as the person who always accommodates, always explains, always makes themselves smaller. Schopenhauer would identify this as the will's perverse training program. It teaches us that diminishment is safety, that apology is armor, and that making ourselves smaller will somehow make us more lovable. But the will is lying. It keeps us trapped in patterns of self-negation that ensure our continued suffering while training others to expect our submission. The throne built from apologies elevates you above your own power, making you too high to touch and too far to matter. How many sorries have you stacked between yourself and your own worth? When you apologize for taking up space, having needs, or feeling things deeply, who taught you that your existence required permission? Your throne of regrets may feel like humility, but it's actually the highest tower in the prison you've built around your own voice. How high can you rise on bricks of regret before you vanish from sight? She holds a compass in her palm, but its needle spins wildly, pointing toward every person except herself. North has become what they want, south what they expect, east and west the endless coordinates of others' desires. When did you lose your own magnetic north? Elena had spent her life as an emotional GPS for everyone else, constantly recalibrating her direction based on the needs, moods, and preferences of others. She was the woman who changed her opinions to match her date's politics, who transformed her interests to mirror her friends' hobbies, who reshaped her dreams to fit other people's versions of success. In the landscape of her dreams, Elena found herself in a vast desert where every grain of sand was a choice she had never made, a preference she had never expressed, a desire she had never acknowledged. The desert stretched endlessly, and her only navigation tool was the broken compass in her hand, its needle spinning frantically between the magnetic pulls of 1,000 different expectations. She followed the compass toward a series of mirages. The perfect girlfriend mirage showed her cooking meals she didn't like for a man she barely knew. The perfect daughter mirage had her pursuing a career that suffocated her soul. The perfect friend mirage saw her saying yes to plans that drained her energy and no to opportunities that excited her heart. Each mirage was compelling, detailed, seductive, and completely empty. When she reached them, they dissolved into sand, leaving her more lost than before. The compass spun faster, its needle now cracking from the constant motion, pointing everywhere and nowhere at once. Finally, Elena threw the broken compass into the sand and sat down in the desert. For the first time in years, she had no direction, no expectation to follow, no magnetic pull except the beating of her own heart. In the silence, she began to notice subtle signs she had ignored. The way certain thoughts made her feel expansive, how specific dreams filled her with energy, Which directions felt like coming home rather than running away? Schopenhauer knew that the will tricks us into believing we need external coordinates for meaning, but true navigation comes from the magnetic field of our own authentic desires. Elena realized that being lost was not the problem. Being found by everyone else's compass was the trap that had kept her circling in place for years. This reveals external locus of control, conceptualized by Julian Rotter in 1954. It describes people who believe their outcomes are determined by external forces rather than their own actions and choices. In modern life, this manifests as chronic people-pleasing, where decisions are made based on others' approval rather than personal values. In career contexts, it appears as choosing paths based on family expectations rather than authentic interests. In relationships, it shows up as shape-shifting to match partners' preferences while losing touch with personal desires and boundaries. Schopenhauer would see this as the will's ultimate deception, convincing us that meaning comes from external sources while ensuring we remain perpetually dependent on others for direction. The compass that points to everyone else keeps us spinning in circles, never arriving at our own truth because we've forgotten how to locate our internal magnetic north. The compass that points to everyone else will navigate you everywhere except to yourself. And without that destination, every journey is just elaborate wandering. What would happen if you threw away the broken compass and sat still in your own desert? When the needle stopped spinning toward others' expectations, what magnetic pull might you discover in the silence of your own heart? Your internal compass isn't broken. It's just been shouted down by 1,000 other voices demanding to be followed. In the architecture of self-deception, we build elaborate prisons from our own accommodation, apologize our way into irrelevance, and follow compasses that lead us everywhere except home. But within each fable lies a key, the recognition that our greatest fear isn't rejection. It's the terrifying possibility that we might be worthy of love without earning it, powerful without apologizing for it, and magnetic without chasing what retreats from our pursuit. The savage truth Machiavelli whispered centuries ago echoes still. Respect is not given to those who beg for it. Love is not attracted to those who chase it, and power belongs to those who have forgotten they need permission to claim it.